everyone, it's Natalie Bencavanga, and welcome to Facts Over Fear. We have a really timely conversation for you today. Now, a harrowing scene took place yesterday on Memorial Day at Delaney Detention Center in Newark, New Jersey. This was a day, it is Memorial Day, right? So it was devoted to remembering people that were in the armed forces who have lost their lives, but some who are currently in service were attacked by ICE agents, along with many groups that were protesting what is going on there, including New Jersey Governor Mikey Sherrill, who visited the detention center and was denied access upon joining protesters demanding to get into the facility to understand the conditions of the center, including rotten and spoiled food and inadequate medical care. There are also several hundred people on hunger strike right now in this space. The standoff grew very tense. ICE agents deployed pepper balls and spray. They were in armored vehicles. It was terrifying to even watch on video. After the governor left, the scene worsened outside the detention facility. A very tense standoff erupted between ICE and protesters who were blocking an entrance. The agents responded by firing pepper balls and spray at the protesters. Senator Andy Kim, who was trying to de-escalate the situation, was among those impacted. Now, according to The Guardian, Senator Kim saw chaos and standoff between protesters and agents. Videos posted on social media showed Kim receiving help from a volunteer who was seen pouring water in his eyes outside Delaney Hall in Newark, where detainees are reportedly, like I said, on a hunger strike against all of these horrific conditions. You know, I have been talking a lot about this situation happening right in our own backyard here in Pennsylvania at Moshannon, where also several hundred people are currently on hunger strike, and now many of them are in solitary confinement. This is not an isolated incident. The cancer of ICE continues to spread as our Congress members continue to really do nothing. Demonstrators clashed with immigration officials who used also batons as they attempted to transfer a detainee who organized the hunger strike to another facility. So how are governors able to respond to what ICE is doing if they're not even able to gain access into these spaces in their own home state? Here joining me today is Green Party candidate for governor of California, Butch Ware. Butch, thank you so much for being here.
It's an honor and a privilege and a pleasure. Wish it could be under more auspicious circumstances, but auspicious circumstances are hard to come by when you are in a rapidly cascading systems failure inside, an imperialist fascist state. So yeah.
Amen and all of that. Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, call it like it is. And I had a whole list of questions prepared for you because we were supposed to do this conversation a few days ago, but
Yeah.
actually this is even more timely because I think this speaks to the current moment that we're in, this urgency. And so before we get into some of those questions about your candidacy and why you're choosing to run for governor, I
Yeah.
wanted to get your thoughts, first of all, on the idea that governors are being denied access to these detention facilities. And what would you do if you were in Mikey Sherrill's position or another governor in this moment as the Green Party candidate if you were to become governor?
Sure. So, I mean, I think that it's a salutary move to try to go visit and observe conditions. But governors have much more power at their disposal than merely doing site visits at unconstitutional federal detention facilities. Governors have sovereign power, executive power inside their states. So what I've said on any number of occasions, this is on the record, is that as governor of the state of California, I swear my oath on the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of California. And so I will not comply with any unconstitutional federal orders, period, which means that the feds should have to go through every single lawyer and law enforcement officer in any state before they so much as touch a hair on the head of any resident of that state, right? And any sitting governor, Democrat or Republican, could exercise that authority now. And in fact, they are duty bound and constitutionally bound to exercise that authority right now, but they are not going to do so because in order to put up the actual resistance that is necessary to defend yourself from a fascist state that is extending its tentacles further and further into our society, and eroding even the meager civil liberties that many of us people of color have enjoyed, right? That's eroding those, systematically by the day, is that in order to resist that, you actually have to provide like system-wide resistance. And unfortunately, Democrat establishment is not going to do that either because that would alienate their donor base. In order to put up the fight that is needed to actually protect our people, you're going to have to give up your protective function for the billionaires in the donor class. So unfortunately, it's going to create tragic moments. It's going to create photo opportunities. It's going to create the visible optics of a clash between blue and red. But this is not about a clash between blue and red. Blue and red have together framed a racist immigration policy that has eroded our civil rights and civil liberties over the course of decades. And it's actually going to take somebody that's willing to stand up to the duopoly as a whole in order to provide proper resistance. Last thing on this, that just to illustrate the point. I'm in addition to being a candidate for governor, I'm also a history professor. I teach, Black history, African history, revolutionary history at the University of California, Santa Barbara. So I often put things in historical perspective. Julius Nyerere, first president of Tanzania, said, of course, the United States is a single party state, but with typical American extravagance, they have two of them,
No,
right?
that's
So
a great quote. Ooh.
isn't that just outstanding, right?
Oh,
And,
yes. I'm stealing that.
no, you're
I mean, I'll
welcome
credit
to.
him.
He put it. Listen, I'm just quoting him. That's
Yeah.
not one for me. But I'll give you one from me to underline it, right? And this is
Mm,
the fundamental problem that people refuse to accept, which is that if you were to make a Venn diagram
mhm.
that consisted of the donor base for the Democrats and the donor base for the Republicans, you would be staring through a single circle,
Yeah.
right? That in the end, the surveillance companies, the weapons manufacturers, the ones that are building the data centers and APAC and these other special interests and warmongers, they fund both sides. And a WWE wrestling match is staged between blue and red to keep people distracted from what is actually needed in order to take the power back, which is to stop focusing on a fake culture war between a so-called left and a so-called right, and actually focus on the fact that the 1% and the 0.1% is increasingly arrogating powers unto themselves that belong to the people.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that point is being illustrated really well in LA with the mayoral candidate of Spencer Pratt being backed by billionaire class money that's not even from the home state. I mean, to me, that's a perfect illustration of this whole oligarchy are the ones that are really controlling or trying to usurp that power over our electoral process, as well as the people that are being upheld in these spaces. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about why you
Mm,
wanted to be governor. You're not a career politician. You're,
yep.
like you said, you're an educator, you're an orator, you're an activist. I mean, you've been in these spaces. I believe you were also the vice presidential candidate for under with Jill Stein.
For the Green Party in 2024, correct? Yeah.
Yes. And so, you've been a part of these, sort of outside movements for a while. And the only reason I use that word is outside this, like you said, this sort of mirage of this two-party system that we have. Why governor? And if you were to be elected governor, because there aren't a lot of Green Party candidates established in, the local and regional aspects of government of California or really around the country, how difficult do you think it would be to actually get things done outside of executive orders, which we know people are becoming increasingly hostile towards because of the abuse of power that we've seen with the Trump
Yeah.
administration overutilizing them?
Definitely. I think that there's a difference, of course, broadly between executive orders that are wildly unpopular and undertaken because they can't pass, and executive orders that are on wildly popular things, like, for example, universal single payer healthcare, which is something that I'm running on, and which is 81% of Californians are in favor of. So I guess I'll backtrack to the kind of the root of the question. Um, uh, uh, but I'll come back through the kind of the governance questions that are raised by running as a Green. So first of all, there are currently hundreds of Greens serving, nationwide. The Green Party actually wins elections all the time, right? So 57% of the races in which we've stood a candidate for the last 3 years, that Green Party candidate has won office. And inside the state of California, that number is 78%. Now, those are all for lower offices, but we beat Team Blue and Team Red together when there's no fire hose of money or media attention that they can put on a race and just drown out the popularity of our platform and our policies, and frankly, candidate quality, because we don't have candidates that are bought out by corporate interests, because Green candidates are forbidden from taking a penny of corporate money, a penny of PAC money. So we're always, running just as public servants, not as, politicians in service of special interests. Why governor specifically? Well, one of the unfair criticisms that's made about the Green Party is, where are you guys between presidential elections? Which is a wild question to begin with, because we're actually the only national third party that wins elections routinely between presidential elections. We're the only one that has that kind of electoral, record. And I won't, throw shade, on other third parties, but there are third parties, that run for office that have never won an election for anything anywhere, right? PSL comes to mind. I said I wouldn't throw shade, and then I threw a little bit of shade. But all that's just to say there are some people that use electoral politics just as an organizing tool for building their respective political parties, but winning elections isn't necessarily the outcome that they're seeking.
Mhm.
Greens are very much seeking the outcome of actually winning elections. So the reason why I targeted the governor's campaign specifically is because of this jungle primary, and because you had a wildly unpopular Democratic incumbent outgoing, and it was going to be an open free for all. It's only going to take about 1 million votes in the primary on June 2nd to finish in the top two in that jungle primary. And a jungle primary is usually just designed to rubber stamp one blue versus one red. But California leans so far, liberal, left, progressive, that there are more registered independents than there are registered Republicans. So this really left them open and vulnerable to an attack from a true populist, leftist, position. And they perceived that weakness just the same way that I perceived it, because as soon as we reached the point where we were polling within 5 points of the Democrat leaders, the Secretary of State of California moved to knock me off of the ballot. And to try to make sure that I wasn't allowed to participate in the nationally televised debates, because I had been technically disqualified from the ballot. Because get this, they said that I forgot to redact a phone number on my 2024 tax returns that I have, as a candidate, am required to file. And they gave me 10 minutes to fix this redaction error. Otherwise, they were going to disqualify me from the ballot. When we took them to court, it turned out that they had the correct form in their possession the whole time. The whole thing, yeah, the whole thing was just a pretext that was designed to remove an electoral political threat. But we immediately just launched our write-in campaign, and there are tens of thousands of people throughout the state of California who have already written Butch Ware on a ballot. And that is a very, very dangerous thing for the duopoly.
Mhm.
Like I said, the reason why I targeted California was because the system is vulnerable there, but also because it's the place where we can immediately transform the political fate of the whole country. Executive authority inside of the state of California is very thoroughgoing. There's direct appointment power for hundreds of positions. There's direct budgetary control in ways that don't exist in other states. Let me just be clear about this. Uh, Californians don't want their tax dollars being used to blow up kids in Palestine. And the thing is I'm leading a statewide divestment effort. That's a very dangerous thing for the empire, right? To have the largest economy in the United States and the third largest economy in the planet divest from genocide and occupation, divest from Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Grumman, and Boeing, and instead invest in healthcare, housing, education, all of the things that we all need, and protecting our communities from, from federally sanctioned kidnappings. So I'll stop there.
No, I appreciate all of those points, and thank you for answering the next question, which I was going to ask you about the write-in ballot
Yeah.
situation. And I do think it's interesting because the outgoing governor Gavin Newsom, he clearly has presidential aspirations, and what I'm hearing from a lot of people, unfortunately on the left, is in particular is that we need to go more moderate, that we need to meet people in the middle, to which I always say there is no meeting a fascist anywhere, um,
No,
and period. But I think the frustration that I feel sort of mirrors what you're talking about in terms of investment in our communities, which is we all are angry right now, and there is so much going on to be angry about. And there are people organizing, and I keep telling community members when they DM me, plug into your local mutual aid groups, plug into
yep,
spaces and places that you feel energized by. Everybody can't do everything, we can all do something. But when you have and you see this in your own life, this anecdotal evidence that people are incredibly dissatisfied, that they want all the things you just talked about. They want healthcare. They want a solid education. They want childcare. They want their communities to be resourced and
yep.
secure. And then they turn around and say, well, we need to be more moderate. But the moderate means no to single payer healthcare. It means supporting ICE, right? They're not abolishing ICE, a lot of these establishment
They're
Democrats.
running cover and carrying water for ICE.
Okay, so I guess my question for you is and this is why I wanted to have you on my show, because when I found out
Yeah,
you were a write-in, I was very curious about this whole
yeah,
situation and why you weren't getting platformed. And so thank you for joining me.
yeah.
But why do you think there is such a cognitive disconnect between the realities that people are facing at their dinner table and in their communities versus how they're voting? Do you think it is due to the disinformation machine? Do you think it's this idea that there's just not enough of us that feel this way to make a difference? What are your thoughts? Because as a writing candidate, I mean, you are really going on a hope and a prayer that people understand the severity of this and that they're
Yeah.
willing to take a leap of faith.
Yeah. So the first thing is that as it happens, write-in candidates win primaries all the time. Lisa Murkowski won, Strom Thurmond won as a write-in,
Whew.
LBJ won as a write-in candidate in a primary. Biden won as a write-in candidate. So it is a leap of faith. But let me just be clear. There's like 60 candidates that they let on the ballot. By the way, several of them actually made the mistake that they accused me of making, and then that we proved in court that I didn't make, and they're on the ballot anyway. So just know that this was very clearly a targeted effort to remove me. But it's much easier because of that crowded ballot to just say, like the kids at the Columbia encampment said, I ain't reading all that, Free Palestine. You can just say, I ain't reading all that. Butch Ware, right? And
Mhm.
and that's what people across this state are doing. The write-in is presents an additional challenge, an additional kind of layer of difficulty. But let's be clear, they are signaling that this is a place where they perceive their weakness. They actually understand that the movement that we build, which has thousands of volunteers from San Diego through Humboldt, from the lower part of the state to the northern part of the state, Central Coast, Central Valley, we are everywhere. We're outside. And that the polling numbers that we were getting before were knocked off the ballot, because now that we've been knocked off the ballot, they won't include me in any polls, right?
Right.
So they won't even get a metric of where we stand. But the polling numbers that we had in February and March were the highest that a third party had ever had polled since 1934 in the state of California. So yeah,
Wow.
exactly. They understand the threat, and they understood that it wasn't an abstract threat, because the polling numbers required them to allow me to participate in the debates that were held on April 22nd, April 29th, and May 6th.
Mm.
And that was an outcome that was fundamentally untenable for Zionist-owned media outlets like CBS News. They were not going to let me go on the CBS LA debate and say Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, and the people of California are no longer going to pay for Palestinian kids to get genocided. We don't want to pay to kill kids in other countries. We want to feed and educate them in California,
Mm.
right? So that is a kind of a threat to the system that the system had to respond to with the disenfranchisement that they did. And it's very typical of the Democrats. I mean, people need to understand this. The Dems are not the good guys. They spent $20 million suing Greens off of ballots in 9 states in the 2024 presidential election. That's not what the good guys do. The Democrats like to complain about Republicans trying to steal elections. Republicans usually wait till after the election to steal it. Democrats like to steal the election beforehand by removing candidates that they find difficult to beat. And they knew that they encountered a candidate that was difficult to beat because I was beating them in all of the debates that I was allowed to participate in the summer leading up to this current campaign season. So but that our supporters are not, daunted by this. For context, right? Nationwide in the 2024 presidential election, um, Muslim voters, 53% of Muslim voters voted Green. Only 20% voted Team Blue Genocide, 20% Team Red Fascism. That number was actually higher in the state of California. I mentioned before that it's going to take 1 million votes to finish in the top two in the primary in California. There
Mhm.
are 1 million Muslims in the state of California, and this is a demographic to which I happen to belong. I converted to Islam when I was 15 years old. It's my personal faith tradition, but it's also the community that has been most unflinching in its resistance to Zionist genocide in Palestine. So make no mistake, people are going to write my name in despite the fact that the system is trying to write us out.
So before I go on to some other questions, I just wanted to get a clarity. When you said
Sure.
from the river to the sea, I know I was called out on
Ooh,
social media for saying that, and people told me I was anti-Semitic, that I didn't understand my
right.
history. So I just wanted to give you the opportunity before anyone possibly calls you out when I post this. Can you
Sure.
explain how do you hold
Yeah.
anti-Zionist views and also support the Jewish communities of California, who I'm
Yeah.
assuming you want their vote as well? And of course, we know it's not a monolith. Not all people that support Israel that are Jewish are, but how do you untangle all of
Yeah.
that when you're using charged language that some people still are very responsive to and concerned about?
Where in between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea would you like Palestinians to be unfree? Right? So that's actually the question. And just to be clear, there are 10 times as many Christian Zionists as there are Jewish Zionists.
Mm-hmm.
An attack on Zionists is not targeting an ethnic community or a religious community. It is targeting a settler colonial political movement that is based on apartheid and disenfranchisement and political violence. And the thing is that what we believe in as anti-Zionists, and I ran with a white Jewish anti-Zionist woman. Jill Stein is herself Jewish,
Mm-hmm.
right? And took a beating from police at a pro-Palestine, rally that then she was later arrested for, right? She's still fighting them in court.
Wow.
This 76-year-old woman for a cop beating her up, she's trying to keep herself out of jail for it. So why am I mentioning all this? Because the only justice will be right of return for Palestinian people and a single state that gives the same rights to everyone, irrespective of their ethnic or religious origins. That's actually what we call democracy. And what exists right now in the settler colony that is known as Israel is the farthest thing from democracy that you can imagine. Your rights are determined by your race, by your religion. Those are things that we simply cannot, in any society, um, stomach, frankly. That they brought back the death penalty in Israel recently, but only for Palestinians. Imagine, right? Uh,
No, I hear you and I appreciate your clarity on all of that. And
yeah,
I think it's important that we connect those dots because to your point, what we're seeing here with ICE in our own communities is it's very much, I think, attached to this global idea of who is allowed to exist and who isn't. And I
yeah.
think, what I've heard from moderate Democrats that yell at me a lot is
Mm,
that I focus too much on identity politics, where I believe personally that there is no other way to look at politics than through your own identity and how it intersects with the world around you. And so I know that there have been at some point conversations around transgender rights and abortion. And where do you stand on those issues as it pertains to
Yeah,
how you would address the needs of those communities
yeah,
as it looks to healthcare and
sure.
gender affirming care?
There's been a massive disinformation campaign about me that has been directed by Democrats who fear the electoral coalition that Dr. Jill and I started and which I've extended. I have, throughout the entirety of my life, been entirely pro-choice. I marched for a woman's right to choose alongside my mom when I was 13 years old, just as I marched against police brutality at that same age. Never taken a position at any point in time against a woman's right to choose, pregnant people's right to reproductive care in all circumstances. The one interview that they tried to use to create a gotcha moment, like if you watch to the end of the video, I say a woman's right to choose is absolute. So this is literally just, a smear campaign that is absurd. I'm also 10 toes down in defending the right of transgender people in every domain, including participation in sports. And this is, again, part of a massive disinformation campaign against me. I think that people have a lot of false conceptions about, Black, straight, cis male people, but especially Muslims, and just assume a bunch of things. I hired the Angelica Ross as my director of communications because I believe in bringing thought leaders in the trans community in to help direct policy and communications. And she was so good at her job, I promoted her to my deputy campaign manager within 3 weeks. So my vision is that it's collective liberation or it's no liberation at all, right? That the whole point is that I don't care who you pray with or who you lay with, your rights are sacred. And that the fake culture war that they've ginned up between, Democrats and Republicans is designed to keep people divided and fighting about things that don't affect their money. And it's the reason why we actually never end up with meaningful legislation that protects things like women's reproductive rights. Because let's remember that the Democrats could have done that at any point in time, but they preferred instead to have this be a hot button electoral issue that they could roll out in their constant fear campaign against Republicans. And so they lost the protection. And likewise with the trans community, which is treated like a political football. It'll be invoked falsely to attack an actual populist candidate such as myself. But will trans rights ever be protected under Democrat administrations? We know that they won't, because Gavin Newsom, who you just mentioned a moment ago, said we need to return to being more normal and not have discussions of pronouns. I don't have a problem respecting people's pronouns. And the thing is it's not because, transgender is my identity, but it's because I believe that everybody has the right to define their identity for themselves. As a Black Muslim, Muhammad Ali whooped Sonny Liston's ass because Sonny Liston would not call him Muhammad Ali. He kept insisting on calling him Cassius Clay,
Mm,
right? And for Ali, that's not my name. I told you what my name is. What's my name, right?
mhm,
And so you don't have to explain to me the right to self-definition for the trans community or any other community. Neither do you have to explain to me that human rights are for human beings, and that we have to hold the rights of people that don't believe that we as we believe or show up the way that we show up. We have to hold their rights to their identity and their self-expression as sacred as we hold our own. So that means defending every single person from oppression, discrimination, and especially violence on the basis of how they show up in the world. So if that's a transphobe, I honestly don't know. Well, I do know. It's cynical propaganda that is designed to try to neutralize the coalition that we've built. And last thing I guess I'll say on this is that that's really the key to it,
mhm,
is that I show up as who I am every single time. I tell the story of converting to Islam at age 15 when I read Malcolm's autobiography, and it spoke to me because I needed healing from the same kind of trauma that Malcolm had experienced at the hands of brutal white supremacy. My mom was 15 years old, pregnant with me, told to abort the child because she was pregnant by a black man.
Mm,
My mom's white,
mm,
right? This was 1973 in Washington, D.C., 5 years after interracial unions were made legal for the first time in the United States of America, right?
mm.
And because of that racial regime and the way that it overlaid with class, I never lived at the same street address for a consecutive calendar year until I turned 9. We were in and out of shelters, in and out of public housing, living with relatives, unhoused for significant portions of my childhood. Well, why am I mentioning this? Because what I learned through all of these different, experiences is that it's actually the job of our elected officials to protect everyone, especially the most dispossessed, marginalized, and targeted. And nobody is more scapegoated and targeted right now than the trans community, with, of course, the possible exception of Muslims, because we just saw another mosque shooting in San Diego, right? Carried out by avowed white supremacists who were inspired by the Christchurch shooting in New Zealand. So we need to get past this place where our politics is animated by hatred that is being actively stoked by both Democrats and Republicans across ideological divides. And we need to get back to the place where we stand for one another, right? However we might show up in the world, because our survival depends on our political solidarity in this moment. It absolutely does.
No, I so appreciate that, and that's why I wanted to give you space to
I
share your
appreciate it.
thoughts on these things because I truly believe the only way forward is to see each other in our full humanity and to respect that humanity.
Amen to that.
And as we wrap this up, because I've taken a lot of your time, but I appreciate you being in community
My
with me
pleasure.
today. I wanted to just get your thoughts as if you were to become governor of California. What do you believe are the top three issues that the people of California want addressed day one? And what
Yeah.
would be your plan to begin addressing them?
Yeah. I'll give you five, but I'll do them so quick that we'll
I
count it as
believe
three.
you. Go.
Okay. Um, so the first is universal single payer healthcare. This is, as I mentioned, 81% of Californians want this. The Democrats will never deliver it because their corporate donors do not permit them to deliver on this, despite the fact that it's wildly popular. I'm not going to wait until we have the votes because we just saw that a 75% Democrat state legislature just killed CalCare again. So what I'm going to do is you say that executive orders are unpopular. Only the unpopular ones are unpopular, right? So an executive order that
I'm
is
just saying what
established.
people are saying to me.
Hey,
That's all.
I'm just gently pushing back. Um, and and
Exactly.
and so my retort would just be simply that we're going to establish single payer healthcare by executive order and then let them come take it from us, right? Because
Mhm.
as we saw with Obamacare, which is an abomination and it's a handout to insurance companies and to healthcare companies, and it's actually a huge factor that's driving the healthcare crisis was Obama's solution. But what we did at least find is that even in Republican leaning and right leaning spaces, once people had healthcare, they didn't like to have it taken away from them now, do
Period.
they? Yeah,
Mhm.
so so no premiums, no copays, no deductibles, no nonsense. You get sick, you get care. And we actually don't need to increase taxation in order to do this because 70 cents on every healthcare dollar that's spent in the state is already spent by the taxpayers. It's just that 30 cents on every dollar right now goes to those insurance companies and healthcare companies, and we just need to get those out of the way. Hashtag free Luigi. Next.
I call him the patron saint of healthcare, but that's different.
And I didn't see Luigi do nothing. Let me just make that clear. And I don't talk to police. Next point. So healthcare first, then housing, right? Housing first is the basis of our policy. And what it is that everybody eats before anybody gets seconds. We can't have 1.2 million vacant units in the state of California and 187,000 homeless people sleeping on the streets every night.
Wow.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tax the shit out of Blackstone and BlackRock, who hold thousands of vacant properties and who are driving up the home ownership and home rental costs by the way that they manipulate real estate markets, all with private equity prestidigitation that keeps them from paying taxes and other things and allows them to play with the market and makes it so that we can't afford either to rent or to buy. And we know that every time there's $100 median increase in the average rent, there's a 9% increase in the homeless rate.
Mm.
So what I love about our solution is that what you'll hear Democrats saying, even quote unquote progressive, is that we need to build more housing. We need to build more housing. I'm like, no, you really don't. You've got plenty of housing. You just need to get those private equity firms to come up off of the things that they're holding. And so what we want is social housing, which is modeled on Vienna, Austria, and other parts of Europe. Singapore is another place that has this, where there's a public option that's operated at cost, not for profit by the state. 60% of the housing in Vienna is social housing. It's not public housing, it's not projects. These are mixed income distributed through neighborhoods and areas. We're not talking about ghettos, but we're just talking about publicly owned rental properties that make it so that the alongside just common sense rent control, it keeps the market from going crazy and allows people to actually be able to afford where they live. Between those two pieces, universal single payer healthcare that's comprehensive of mental health treatment and addiction treatment, and addressing the housing crisis, you address the root of the homelessness crisis, right? Because I faced homelessness as a child. I'm not seeing homelessness as something that we need to criminalize. I'm seeing it as a policy failure because people need care and not cages, right? So those are the kind of three things that get dealt with, just by handling healthcare and housing. You get the homelessness fix in the mix. The last three, human rights, we already talked about it. I'm protecting people from the violation of their civil rights and civil liberties with everything that I have as the chief executive in the state. And then I'm also protecting every marginalized community, especially trans communities and others that are targeted, that we're not going to let our brothers and sisters and non-binary siblings in humanity, be face discrimination or oppression, not on my watch. The fourth is divestment from occupation. We're going to divest not just from genocide in Palestine, but from warmongers. Why are our tax dollars going into the coffers of Palantir and other corporations that use that to surveil us and to bomb little kids in other countries? That has to stop, but it will never stop until you hire people for the job that don't owe favors to those corporations and those billionaires. And lastly, divest from occupation, invest in education. I want look, my father was a locksmith with a sixth grade education. Anything that I've been able to achieve has been because of educational opportunities. And I want those kind of educational opportunities for everybody. I'm one of the people that managed to get out because and actually, it wasn't even the educational opportunities. What a lot of people don't know, I got a baseball scholarship. I could throw a baseball 90 miles an hour when I was 17, and I found out in college that I was way better at school than baseball. But a lot of people that grew up in the neighborhoods that I grew up in didn't get that opportunity. So I want universal pre-K. I want free tuition college education, the same way that we had it before Reagan took it away, because we shouldn't be saddling working class kids with a lifetime of student loan debt just so that they can go get a job. Because you know who doesn't have student loan debt? Rich kids, because they
Right.
don't have to take out student loans. Like,
Mhm.
people have not really looked at the student loan crisis as a kind of class warfare. So all of that's just to say that we're looking to create a California where there is equity, but also where there's real prospects for like commercial growth and opportunity. And this is something you don't hear so-called leftists talking about. I'm an anti-capitalist. I'm not anti-commerce. I actually really,
Mhm.
really believe we need thriving commerce in the economy. And that's part of why we want to focus on education, because every development expert will tell you that every dollar you spend on education in childhood yields at least $7 in like productivity in the economy later in life. It's actually the best investment that we can make. And so strangely is universal single payer healthcare, because General Motors pays more for its healthcare than it pays for the steel in its vehicles. So what's going to happen when California gets universal single payer healthcare? Small business is going to flock to the state of California. And people are going to be able to quit crappy jobs and actually like negotiate for for better positions. Labor mobility is going to increase. You're going to rebalance the ratio of power between big corporations that can provide healthcare benefits and small businesses that can't. Right now, I've empowered the small business against the bigger corporations. So there's a lot of growth that can actually come just by pursuing what look like very socialist policies on the face of them, because they are, because like actually capitalism has reached the point where it's so corporate focused that it actually badly inhibits, base meeting of basic economic needs for ordinary people. And the people are fed up with it. They want another option. And that's what we're giving them.
Thank you for all of that. Before we wrap up, I just have one more thought I wanted to ask you
Sure.
as you were talking. I'm COVID cautious. I still mask in public. I truly believe in the intersection of the disability justice communities and how it impacts all of the things that we've experienced. And listening to you talk so passionately about healthcare as a human right, can you talk a little bit about what position you would take as governor as it pertains to the still very active COVID pandemic that we have going that is actively disabling and killing people in all communities, in particular, vulnerable communities? What would you like to say to the community that is still very much aware and trying to take precautions against COVID or have been impacted economically through housing issues and all of the other?
Yeah, and I'll come to the COVID part, but I'll just zoom out to where you started with the with disability. I mean, the first thing is that I center disability in everything we do. I'm the parent of a 15-year-old autistic child who's verbal but not exactly communicative. He can't take care of himself, and I'm always thinking about how to make sure that we are creating a society that works and functions for everybody. Because the reality is that we are all age, illness, or an accident away from being disabled,
Yep,
right? So,
truly.
so, so if we try to pretend that disability is like a secondary or marginal concern, we are cutting off our nose to spite our face, because it is coming for us one way or the other. Disability is, so it absolutely should be central. Let's be clear. We are still living with the effects of an ongoing pandemic that is still killing and harming and diminishing the cognitive faculties of people. Like people will not, acknowledge the effects of long COVID. And even as we're still dealing in the aftermath, not even aftermath, the ongoing, unfolding of this COVID crisis, now we're being prepared for our next pandemic, right? Hantavirus. So let's just be clear. The public health response of both Democrats and Republicans has been absolutely abysmal. And it has been abysmal because those two parties have done so much to erode the public trust in just basic healthcare and public health techniques that are designed to keep us all safe. So the truth of the matter is that the toxicity in our environment, like in our air and in our water, and in our food, and the the literally the toxins that that are and diseases that are destroying our bodies. All of that toxicity in our environment is produced by the toxicity in our politics.
Yeah. Mm,
And until we address that root toxicity in our politics, none of us are going to be free or healthy or safe at all. And we have to understand that if we keep the vote blue no matter who mentality, we're going to continue to end up in exactly the same place that these authorities have led us. I'll end with one from Malcolm. Malcolm said to my community in 64 of the Democrats, he said, "You put them first and they put you last. And
mm.
that makes you a chump. That makes you a political chump." Well, I often ask, people in speeches, aren't y'all tired of being chumped yet? Like, aren't y'all sick and tired of putting your fate in the hands of a political party that, yeah, might be marginally better than Team Red fascism, but only marginally, right? And because you refuse to challenge them electorally,
Mhm.
they will not take a single one of your concerns seriously.
No.
Until you are willing to vote them out of power, they have no reason to listen to any complaint that you have about a goddamn thing that they do. You have to be willing to choose better for yourself. You are literally in an abusive relationship with a toxic, gaslighting narcissist. The Democrats are over here saying, I know I didn't get you that health care that I promised you, baby. And I know I spent up all our, budget on guns and ammo. And I know that the house is falling apart. We haven't spent on infrastructure, but I promise, baby, next time I'm going to take care of you. And it's even worse out there, baby. Those Republicans out there, they're the real bad guys. And how long are we going to let them play in our face like that? That's what I'd like to ask people.
If people want to learn more about your campaign, where can they go?
Butchwareforgov.com. It's the number four and my name. And you can follow me at Butchware on all social media platforms.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being in conversation with me today. I appreciate you and you taking the time to chat with myself and educating my audience. And as always, everyone, until next time, please take care of yourselves and each other.